What if the one thing you trusted to protect your family was the one thing that could lead the monsters right to your door? In the heart of the Colorado Rockies, nestled in a valley carved by ancient glaciers, lies the town of Havenwood. It's the kind of place that feels like a memory you've always had, even if you've never been there. A place where sunlight filters through aspen trees, painting the single main street in shifting patterns of gold. Where the air smells of pine and damp earth, and the loudest sound is usually the gentle murmur of Clear Creek as it rushes past the old town square. This is the world that David, a man whose shoulders carried the quiet weight of a past he never spoke of, had built for his 10-year-old daughter, Clara. After leaving the rigid, dusty world of the Army Rangers, Havenwood was more than a home. It was a sanctuary. Their life was a mosaic of simple, beautiful moments. Clara's laughter as she chased butterflies in their backyard, the smell of pancakes on a Saturday morning, and the steady, reassuring presence of their yellow Labrador Buddy. To everyone in Havenwood, Buddy was the town's unofficial furry mayor. He was a classic lab, all goofy smiles, wagging tail, and an insatiable love for any tennis ball thrown in his direction. He was gentle with the toddlers who tugged his ears, patient with the elderly who fed him scraps from the diner, and Clara's constant furry shadow. But David, trained to see things others missed, noticed the subtle echoes of another life in the dog. He saw it in the way Buddy would sometimes freeze in the middle of a game of fetch, his head-cocked ears tuned to a distant sound no one else could hear. He saw it in the way Buddy's amber eyes would scan the tree line on their evening walks, a silent, methodical patrol. It was a flicker of discipline beneath the surface of the happy-go-lucky pet, a ghost of a training David couldn't place. Their peace, as fragile as a dandelion in the wind, began to fray on a perfect autumn afternoon at the town's weekly farmers market. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of roasted chilies and apple cider. Clara was proudly showing Buddy off to her friends when the ground began to vibrate with a low, guttural rumble. It was a sound that didn't belong here, a sound of iron and anger that rolled into town and silenced the cheerful chatter. They were the Stone Crows, an outlaw motorcycle club, a dozen strong, their leather vests bearing the insignia of a raven with wings of granite. They didn't roar into the square or cause a scene. Their arrival was worse. It was quiet, deliberate, and suffocating. At their lead was a man named Silas. He wasn't the biggest of the group, but a cold, coiled intensity radiated from him. He swung off his bike, and his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, scanned the crowd and locked onto David. There was no shouting, no threats, just a long, chilling moment of recognition that stretched across the market square. Silas's lips curled into a smirk that wasn't a smile. He then walked over to a woodcarver's stall, picked up a small, intricately carved wooden bird, paid the man without a word, and tucked it into his vest, a trophy from a hunt that had just begun. The message was clear. I see you, I'm here, and I'm not leaving. That night, the feeling of being watched lingered in David's small house. As he tucked Clara into bed, she was quiet, the day's unease still clinging to her. To chase away the shadows, David told her a story he'd told 100 times about a brave knight and his loyal golden hound who could sense danger long before any man. The hound was the knight's heart, David whispered, stroking her hair. As long as they were together, no darkness could touch them. But as he looked down at Buddy, who was sleeping at the foot of Clara's bed, the dog let out a low, mournful whine in his sleep. David couldn't shake the image of Silas's eyes or the small wooden bird he'd pocketed. You see, the incredible thing about a breed like the Labrador is that their strength isn't aggression. It's an unwavering, almost supernatural devotion. They are barometers of the human heart, masters of sensing the unspoken fears of the people they love. And right now, Buddy could sense the storm that was gathering just over the horizon, a storm that had followed David from a life he thought he'd escaped. A common mistake is to believe that the monsters will always announce themselves with a roar. But the truth, the lesson David was about to be reminded of in the most brutal way possible, is that real evil often arrives with a whisper. It doesn't break down your door. It stands quietly on your lawn and waits for you to realize you're already in a cage. and the key to unlocking that cage for both David and Silas was unknowingly sleeping at the foot of a little girl's bed. The hunt wasn't just beginning, it was the continuation of a story that had ended in tragedy years ago, and its final heartbreaking chapter was about to be written in the quiet streets of Havenwood. The human mind has a remarkable and sometimes dangerous capacity for denial. We build walls around our past brick by painful brick, believing we can keep the ghosts of yesterday from haunting the rooms of today. David had built a fortress around his memories of the war, a fortress he believed was unshakable. But he was about to learn that some ghosts don't need to break down walls, because they're already inside. The trigger wasn't a biker, a threat, or a shouted word. It was the sky. A week after the Stone Crow's arrival, a massive thunderstorm rolled down from the Rockies, plunging Havenwood into a premature twilight. As lightning spiderwebbed across the sky and thunder cracked like artillery fire, the change in Buddy was terrifyingly immediate. This wasn't the usual canine fear of loud noises. This was something deeper, more visceral. Buddy began pacing the house in tight, frantic circles, his claws clicking on the hardwood floors. A low, continuous whine escaped his throat, and his body trembled uncontrollably. When a particularly loud clap of thunder shook the windows, he didn't hide. He dropped into a military-style low-crawl belly to the floor, inching his way towards the front door as if expecting an explosion. It was the disciplined terror of a soldier under fire. In that moment, he wasn't Buddy the family pet. He was a veteran reliving the worst day of his life. Clara ran to comfort him, but David held her back, his voice grim. "Stay back, sweetie. He's not here with us right now." This was the key David couldn't ignore. Later that night, long after the storm had passed and Buddy was finally asleep, David ran a gentle hand over the dog's flank. Underneath the thick yellow fur near his hip, his fingers found a small raised scar. He carefully trimmed the fur around the area, and his blood ran cold. It was a tattoo faded with time but still unmistakable, a unit insignia, a unit he recognized. His hands shaking, David went to the locked footlocker he kept in his closet, the one containing the ghosts he'd tried so hard to bury. He pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The voice that answered was gravelly, belonging to a man from his old life, a life of dust and shadows. "It's Carter," David said, his voice strained. "I need you to look up a K9 for me. Name was Apollo, yellow lab, served with the 3rd Ranger Battalion." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by the clacking of a keyboard. Then the voice came back heavy with a significance that made the hair on David's arms stand up. "Apollo. Christ. Carter. Where did you find him?" He was declared MIA after Operation Nomad Fury. His handler was a Corporal Alex Grant. Kid was a rising star. He was killed in action on that mission. David's breath hitched. Operation Nomad Fury, the mission that had ended his career, the mission that haunted his nightmares. "And the report?" David asked, already dreading the answer. "It's here," the voice said grimly. "Grant was killed by an IED. Apollo was wounded but dragged 2 other men to safety before disappearing in the chaos. The ranking officer on that mission, the one who signed off on the final report, was you, Captain David Carter." The phone nearly slipped from David's hand. It all crashed into place. Buddy was Apollo, the dog who had saved his men, the dog belonging to a soldier who had died under his command. And that soldier, Corporal Alex Grant, was Silas's younger brother. This wasn't a random act of intimidation. This was a pilgrimage. Silas hadn't come to Havenwood to start a fight. He had come looking for an answer. And here is the twist that changes everything. From the outside, it's easy to paint a man like Silas as a one-dimensional villain. But trauma is a prism that shatters truth into a million different pieces. In a grimy motel room on the edge of town, we see a different side of the story. Elias, Silas's second-in-command, watched as his leader obsessively cleaned the small wooden bird. "This is madness, Silas," Elias said, his voice low. "The man is just a civilian with a kid. What do you hope to find?" Silas finally looked up, his eyes burning with a grief so raw it was almost holy. Alex wasn't just a soldier, he said quietly. He was a whistleblower. He told me he had proof, a data drive, a journal, something that the whole mission was a setup designed to fail to cover up a smuggling route. He said if anything happened to him, Apollo would know, that the dog was trained to find it. This is the fatal mistake that grief forces upon us. When the truth is too painful to accept, that loss can be random, tragic, and senseless, we build a new reality. Silas couldn't accept that his heroic younger brother died by chance. So he constructed a grand conspiracy, a dragon to slay with David, cast as the villain guarding the secret. He believed Buddy was the key, the living map to the evidence that would give his brother's death meaning. He was hunting a ghost, chasing a conspiracy that didn't exist, and he was willing to burn down an entire town to find it. The past you see is never truly dead. It's not even past. It's a living, breathing entity that coils around the present. And for David Silas, and a loving Labrador named Buddy, the past was no longer whispering from the shadows. It was about to kick down the door and demand a final reckoning. There is a fundamental truth about conflict that is often misunderstood. The most effective siege is not one of fire and stone, but one of silence and whispers. A physical attack unites a community against a common enemy. But psychological warfare, that turns a community against itself. It isolates it, poisons it, corrodes trust, until a person is left standing utterly alone. And Silas, a man forged in the crucible of grief, understood this better than anyone. The siege of Havenwood began not with a bang, but with an unnerving stillness. The Stone Crows didn't vandalize shops or start bar fights. Their tactics were far more insidious. They became silent, leather-clad ghosts, haunting the edges of David and Clara's life. When Clara walked to school, a single biker would be parked at the end of the street, engine off, just watching. When David went for groceries, 2 of them would be in the diner across the street staring at him through the window, their faces blank. They never broke a law. They never made a direct threat. But their presence was a constant suffocating pressure. And then came the wooden birds. One morning David found a small hand-carved raven on his doorstep. The next day, another appeared on the gatepost. The day after, one was tied to the branch of the tree Clara played under. They were markers, symbols of surveillance, a quiet declaration that every part of their sanctuary had been breached. Fear is a contagion, and it spread through Havenwood like a fever. Whispers started in the checkout lines and at the post office. Why are they here? What did that ex-soldier David do? Silas, a master manipulator, fueled the flames. He would sit at the town bar, not drinking heavily, but talking. He'd speak of his brother, the fallen hero. He'd hint at a cover-up, a decorated officer hiding a terrible secret. He never accused David directly. He simply planted seeds of doubt and let the town's fear do the rest. Soon old friends would cross the street to avoid David. Parents would call their children inside when Clara and Buddy walked by. The isolation was a wall being built around them, brick by silent brick. And inside that wall, David was fighting a war on 2 fronts. One was against Silas. The other was against the man he used to be. Every instinct from his ranger training screamed at him to act, to neutralize the threat with the brutal efficiency he'd been taught. One night Clara found him in the garage, methodically cleaning his old service weapon, his movements precise and deadly. But when he looked up, he saw his reflection in the polished steel, and behind it a framed photo of him and Clara smiling. He put the weapon down. Resisting the urge to become the monster Silas wanted him to be was the hardest battle he'd ever fought. This slow, suffocating strategy began to create fractures within the Stone Crows themselves. Elias, a man who had joined the club for brotherhood, not obsession, finally confronted his leader. "This isn't justice anymore, Silas," he argued, his voice tense. "This is you tearing a town apart over a ghost story. You're terrorizing a child. Alex wouldn't have wanted this." Silas turned, his eyes hollowed out by his grief. "You don't understand," he hissed. "The truth is the only thing that matters, and I will burn this whole valley to the ground to find it." It's a fascinating, tragic contrast. Both David and Silas were soldiers shaped by the same war. Both had experienced profound loss. but their grief had set them on two completely different paths. David was fighting to protect the future, to preserve the light in his daughter's eyes. Silas was fighting to avenge the past, willing to drag everyone around him into his own personal darkness. And this is the most important lesson from the Siege of Silence. The ultimate test of character is not how you fight your enemies, but how you refuse to become them. David was holding on to his principles, but he knew this Cold War couldn't last. Silas was growing more unhinged, more desperate. The pressure was building, and something had to break. David knew that the next move couldn't be a defensive one. He would have to step out from behind his walls and face the storm head-on. He just didn't realize that Silas had already laid the perfect trap and that the bait would be his daughter. In every story of conflict, there comes a point where the pressure can no longer be contained. The board is set, the pieces have all been moved, and the final decisive play is at hand. David believed this final play would be his to make. But in his grief-fueled obsession, Silas had already orchestrated his own endgame, choosing a stage that was both a sanctuary and a trap, the old granite quarry just north of town. It was a place of quiet, stark beauty where Alex Grant used to take his young canine Apollo to train and escape the world. Silas knew this. He used this knowledge to lure Clara and Buddy there, staging a breakdown on the access road he knew Clara would use as a shortcut home. He didn't want to harm her. In his twisted mind, he simply needed to create a controlled environment. He needed to trigger the dog's training to force Buddy Apollo to finally lead him to the phantom evidence he so desperately needed to exist. When David got the frantic one-word text from Elias Quarry, a cold dread seized him. But as he raced towards the location, the ghost of the soldier he once was gave way to the father he had become. He left his weapon behind. Instead, he grabbed two things from the footlocker, the folded service flag that had been given to Alex's family, and a worn photograph of a smiling young soldier with his arm around a yellow Labrador puppy. He arrived to a scene of unbearable tension. Silas stood before a terrified Clara, who was protectively holding Buddy's collar. Silas wasn't yelling. His voice was a low, desperate plea. "Find it, Apollo," he begged the distressed dog, his hands trembling. "For Alex, you have to show me. Find it." But Buddy wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a pet, confused and frightened, his loyalty torn between the ghost of a command in Silas's voice and the terrified girl holding on to him. He whined, looking from Silas to Clara, his body trembling. And in that moment something shifted in Clara. Seeing the animal she loved in so much pain, her fear was replaced by a fierce, protective love. She let go of Buddy's collar, stepped between him and Silas, and held up her small hands. "Stop it," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You're scaring him." Then she did what her father had taught her, a simple routine for when Buddy got anxious during thunderstorms. She spoke softly, her voice a calming anchor in the tense air. "It's okay, Buddy. You're home now. You're home." As she spoke, she performed a unique, deliberate hand signal. It wasn't a sharp military gesture. It was a slow, gentle closing of her fist, which she then rested over her heart. And here is the twist that no one saw coming. This wasn't a command David had taught her. It was a gesture she had described to him once, a fuzzy, half-remembered image from the day they first adopted Buddy. It was a signal that Alex Grant, and only Alex Grant, had ever used. It wasn't an order to attack, to search, or to perform a task. It was the special silent command Alex had developed for his canine partner to signify the end of a mission. It meant, "Stand down, soldier. The danger is over. You can just be a dog now." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Upon seeing the signal, all the tension drained from Buddy's body. The soldier Apollo was gone. He looked past Silas, his eyes soft. And then he did something that shattered the very foundation of Silas's rage. He walked slowly towards the grieving, broken biker, the man who was the source of all his recent fear, and gently rested his heavy head on Silas's lap. He let out a soft whine, an act not of aggression, but of pure, remembered comfort, a gesture from a dog to the brother of the man he had loved. Silas stared down at the Labrador's head on his knee, and a decade of rage, denial, and obsession crumbled into dust. A ragged, guttural sob tore from his chest. There was no conspiracy. There was no cover-up. There was only this dog offering him the same comfort his brother once did. As if on cue, Elias stepped out from the trees holding not a weapon but a manila folder. He placed it on the ground in front of Silas. "It's the unredacted mission report," Elias said softly. "I called in a favor. There was no setup, Silas. Alex died trying to shield his squad from an IED. He saved 3 men. He was a hero." The truth, stark and simple, finally pierced through the armor of Silas's grief. This entire siege, the fear, the intimidation, it had all been a war against a phantom. And the final unconditional surrender was triggered not by a bullet or a punch, but by the gentle, loving language of a dog who simply remembered his boy. It's a powerful lesson. Sometimes the only thing that can disarm a heart full of hate is an act of love so pure it demands to be seen. A story does not truly end when the conflict is over. It ends when the healing begins. In the quiet aftermath at the granite quarry, there were no sirens, no shouting, only the sound of the wind and the soft sobs of a man finally facing the truth. Silas, no longer a menacing leader, but a grieving brother, didn't resist. He seemed to welcome the quiet authority of the local sheriff who arrived moments later. Before he was led away, he stopped in front of David. He reached into his vest and pulled out the small carved wooden bird. He pressed it into David's hand. "Alex made these," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He said they were good for finding your way home." And with that, he was gone, a man finally on a long, painful road back to himself. In the days that followed, a wave of shame and then kindness washed over Havenwood. The whispers that had haunted David and Clara were replaced with gestures of support. Neighbors left pies on their doorstep. The owner of the diner insisted their meals were always on the house. The town, having been shown the ugly reflection of its own fear, was now determined to heal itself by healing the family it had wronged. They had been reminded that a community is not defined by the threats it faces, but by how it cares for its own in the aftermath. But the most profound change happened not in the town, but in the small house at the end of the lane. The weight David had carried on his shoulders for a decade finally began to lift. The ghosts of Operation Nomad Fury had been laid to rest not by forgetting, but by the unexpected forgiveness that came from a dog's love and a daughter's courage. 3 months later, a small crowd gathered at a newly renovated ranch just outside of town. A freshly painted sign hung over the entrance reading, "The Apollo Project." Founded by David and funded by a now remorseful and anonymous Silas, it was a sanctuary, a place where retired military working dogs, heroes who had served their country, could be retrained and paired with veterans suffering from the invisible wounds of war. The final scene of our story is not one of drama or conflict, but of simple, beautiful peace. On a sun-drenched afternoon, Clara stands in the training field. She is working with a new rescue, a timid German shepherd who flinches at every sudden sound. She holds no leash, only a quiet patience. She kneels down and slowly, deliberately closes her fist and rests it over her heart. The new dog, seeing the calm, non-threatening signal, takes a hesitant step forward and then another. Watching from the porch is David, a genuine smile reaching his eyes for the first time in years. And beside him, lying with his head on his paws, is Buddy. He is older now, his muzzle dusted with gray, his body relaxed. He is no longer Apollo the soldier. He is simply Buddy, a beloved member of a family watching proudly as the little girl he saved teaches another lost soul how to find its way home. The greatest legacy we can leave is not one built on vengeance for the past, but on building a better future from its broken pieces. It is the understanding that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength. David, Clara, and Buddy's story is a testament to that truth, a story of turning pain into a profound and lasting purpose. The incredible bond between a human and an animal like the one between Clara and Buddy is a force of nature. It's a story that plays out in millions of homes every single day. All across the country, heroes with 4 paws are saving our heroes with 2 legs, offering comfort, loyalty, and a reason to hope when all feels lost. Their stories deserve to be told. And now we want to hear yours. In the comments below, please share a story of how an animal has changed your life. Whether it was a dog who helped you through a difficult time, a cat who taught you about unconditional love, or any other creature who left a paw print on your heart. Let's fill this space with a tribute to the silent heroes who walk beside us. And if you believe that stories like these have the power to inspire and to heal, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into a story that matters. Thank you for listening.